Are you ready to discover the true horrors of medieval family life? Have you ever wondered what kind of in-laws could make your marriage a living nightmare in a world without modern comforts, where power meant everything and survival was a daily struggle? In the medieval world, some family connections came with hidden dangers far beyond a mother-in-law's disapproving glare or a brother-in-law's annoying habits. Number 1. The inherited enemy. Picture this. You found love, you've secured a good match, and you're ready to embark on a new life. Then you realize your new family comes with a long, dark shadow, a feud, a grudge, an ancient rivalry passed down through generations, and now you're right in the middle of it. This isn't just about awkward holiday dinners. This is about outright violence, property destruction, and maybe even murder. In the medieval world, family honor was paramount, and insults or injuries from decades past could ignite brutal conflicts at any moment. Your new in-laws might seem charming, but their history could be drenched in blood, making you an instant target in a war you never signed up for. Take, for instance, the famous or infamous feud between the noble families of the Colonna and the Orsini in Rome. For centuries, these two powerful clans battled for control of the Eternal City, their rivalry spilling over into street brawls, assassinations, and even open warfare within the Papal States. If you were to marry into, say, the Colonna family during the 13th or 14th century, you would immediately inherit the Orsini as your sworn enemies. There was no opting out. Chroniclers of the time like Giovanni Vianney detail how these family conflicts weren't just personal. They often influenced papal elections, imperial policies, and the very stability of Italy. Your new Orsini cousin might be a distant relative, but their mere existence could mean a threat to your safety, your wealth, and your future. Marriages were often arranged to cement alliances, but sometimes a marriage simply brought an outsider directly into the heart of an ongoing violent dispute. Colonna bride marrying into an Orsini-allied family might find herself caught between her birth family's loyalties and her new husband's kin, a truly impossible position where choosing sides could mean death. Constant threat of ambush, the need for armed guards, the worry about poisoned wine at a seemingly innocent banquet. This was the reality of inheriting an enemy family. You were no longer just a spouse. You were a new pawn on an ancient chessboard, your life now intrinsically linked to the bitter memories and retaliatory impulses of your in-laws. Consider the lesser-known but equally vicious local feuds that plagued regions like the Holy Roman Empire or the independent communes of Italy. These were not always grand wars between kings, but deep-seated hatreds between neighboring noble houses, often stemming from disputes over land, water rights, or even a perceived slight centuries ago. The family of the Hohenstaufen, despite their imperial power, faced constant challenges from rival princely families within Germany, their marriages often attempts to quell rebellions or secure loyalty. Yet, marrying into a loyal family could mean marrying into a bloodline that secretly harbored resentments against other powerful lords. Countess marrying into a family that had generations ago lost a strategic castle to a neighboring count might suddenly find herself under pressure from her new father-in-law to reclaim that land, even if it meant renewed warfare. This wasn't a choice, it was an expectation. The very act of becoming an in-law made you a participant, a stakeholder in the ongoing vendetta. Your spouse's family might refuse to allow you to visit your own birth family if they were even tangentially connected to an enemy clan. Letters from the era often speak of the constant vigilance required, the need to secure strong alliances, and the devastating consequences of misplaced trust. A wedding, a day meant for celebration, could be seen as the ultimate betrayal by the enemy family, making the newlyweds prime targets. Constant fear of reprisal, the need to always travel with armed retainers, the inability to ever truly relax. This was the daily life of someone whose in-laws came with an inherited enemy. The burden wasn't just physical danger, it was psychological. Imagine living your entire married life knowing that a distant cousin of your father-in-law might one day decide to avenge a slight from decades ago, putting your entire household at risk. Medieval chronicles like those of Froissart are filled with tales of seemingly minor disputes, escalating into full-blown sieges and massacres, all driven by the relentless pursuit of family honor and vengeance. Your in-laws, in their pursuit of justice for an ancestor, might commit acts that were morally questionable, leaving you complicit by association. If your new family decided to burn down an enemy's village or seize their lands by force, you were now part of that family, and its reputation, good or bad, became your own. The shame of being associated with a family known for treachery, or the constant threat of being targeted by those seeking revenge against your new kin, could overshadow any personal happiness. There was no escape from the past when it came to medieval family feuds. You either became an active participant or a helpless victim. Number 2. The royal manipulator. Stepping into the gilded halls of royalty might seem like a dream, a fantasy of power and prestige. But if your in-laws were ruling monarchs, your life was not your own. It was a tool, a pawn in a grand political game played by ruthless hands. Your feelings, your happiness, your very survival were secondary to the machinations of the crown. A royal manipulator, as an in-law, would see your marriage not as a union of two people, but as a strategic alliance, a means to consolidate power, expand territory, or secure an heir. And when you outlived your usefulness, or worse, became an inconvenience, your royal in-laws would discard you without a second thought, often with devastating consequences. Consider the life of Catherine of Valois, daughter of Charles VI of France, a king often plagued by mental illness, and his politically shrewd queen, Isabeau of Bavaria. Catherine's marriage to Henry V of England was not a love match. It was the ultimate political maneuver, a cornerstone of the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. Her parents, especially her mother, engineered this union to end the 100 Years' War, effectively ceding the French throne to the English king's descendants. Catherine herself was merely the vessel, the living proof of the treaty. She was handed over to a foreign king, a conqueror, as if she were a piece of territory. Her father, the king, barely comprehended his own kingdom, let alone his daughter's fate, while her mother, Isabeau, pursued complex political alliances seemingly indifferent to Catherine's personal desires. The contemporary accounts from French chroniclers and English sources alike depict Catherine as a gentle soul, perhaps overwhelmed by the immense political pressures placed upon her. Her royal in-laws, her husband's family, and her own parents ensured that her life was dictated by statecraft. When Henry V died suddenly, leaving her a young widow with an infant son, Henry VI, her usefulness as a queen consort diminished, but her royal bloodline continued to be a potent political force. Her subsequent secret marriage to Owen Tudor, a Welsh squire, infuriated the English Regency Council, who saw it as a disgrace to the royal bloodline and a threat to the stability of the realm. Laws were even passed to prevent future marriages of queens dowager without royal consent. Her royal in-laws, even after her husband's death, continued to exert suffocating control, demonstrating that even a queen's private life was never truly her own. They had used her, and they would continue to control her until her last breath. Her life was defined by the needs of the crowns, not her own. Another chilling example of the royal manipulator as an in-law is Philip IV, often called Philip the Fair King of France in the early 14th century. He was a master of political maneuvering, always seeking to consolidate power and expand the prestige of the French crown. His daughters-in-law, Margaret of Burgundy, Blanche of Burgundy, and Joan II of Burgundy, were all married to his sons, future kings of France. These marriages were meant to secure alliances and produce heirs. But in 1314, a scandal erupted known as the Tour de Nasle affair, where Margaret and Blanche were accused of adultery. Philip IV's reaction was swift and brutal, far exceeding what might have been expected even in a harsh age. The alleged lovers were cruelly executed, and the princesses themselves were imprisoned. Margaret died in captivity, likely under suspicious circumstances, and Blanche remained imprisoned for the rest of her life, never to be released. Joan, initially implicated but later acquitted, only survived because her husband, the future Philip V, stood by her. Philip IV's ruthless actions, though ostensibly about preserving the honor of the royal family, were also a powerful display of his absolute authority. He used the scandal to eliminate potential threats, to assert dominance over his Burgundian in-laws, and to demonstrate that no one, not even members of his own immediate family, was beyond his reach if they threatened the monarchy's image. He saw his daughters-in-law not as individuals with rights or feelings, but as extensions of the crown, whose every action had political ramifications. Chroniclers of the time, such as Guillaume de Nangis, highlight the shock and terror this event caused throughout Europe, treating Philip IV as an in-law whose ambition and ruthlessness knew no bounds, treating his own children and their spouses as disposable assets in his relentless pursuit of power. Imagine being married into such a family, knowing that your every move is scrutinized, your every misstep could lead to imprisonment or worse. Your father-in-law, the king, dictates not only your public life, but your most intimate personal choices. Your fertility becomes a matter of state. Your friendships are vetted for political loyalty, and your very existence is contingent on your ability to serve the crown's interests. The weight of expectations, the constant surveillance, and the terrifying knowledge that you are expendable would be an unbearable burden. Royal manipulator-in-laws ensured that their children's spouses lived in a gilded cage, where personal freedom was a fantasy and dignity was a luxury rarely afforded. Their marriages were not partnerships, but contracts, and the cost of breaking those contracts, or even being perceived to have broken them, was often everything. Number 3. The Spiritually Zealot. In an age deeply steeped in religious belief, where the church held immense power and salvation was the ultimate goal, a spiritually zealous in-law could transform your life into a waking nightmare. This wasn't about gentle encouragement to attend Mass. This was about absolute, unyielding adherence to a rigid doctrine where dissent was heresy, and any deviation from their path could lead to excommunication, persecution, or even the dreaded Inquisition. Your in-laws might believe they were saving your soul, but their methods could destroy your body and spirit, dragging you into their fanatical crusades, demanding impossible piety, and turning every aspect of your life into a test of faith you could never truly pass. Consider the plight of someone marrying into a family deeply involved in the Albigensian Crusade in 13th century southern France. This was a brutal conflict, often described as a war of extermination, aimed at rooting out Catholicism, a Christian dualist movement deemed heretical by the Catholic Church. If your in-laws were staunch Catholic nobles, perhaps even those who had taken the Crusaders' cross, they would see it as their sacred duty to cleanse the land of heresy. Imagine being a young woman marrying into the family of Simon de Montfort the Elder, the ruthless leader of the crusade. His zeal was legendary, and he believed absolutely in the righteousness of his cause. Your new family would not just attend Mass. They would be actively participating in the brutal suppression of their neighbors, friends, and sometimes even their own relatives who were suspected of Cathar sympathies. Chronicles, such as those written by Pierre de Vaux de Cernay, detail the widespread destruction, the sieges, and the massacres carried out in the name of God. Your in-laws would expect you to share their fervent devotion, to perhaps even participate in the denunciations of heretics, to turn a blind eye to the atrocities committed. Any flicker of sympathy for the persecuted, any doubt about the righteousness of their cause, could brand you as suspect, as someone whose faith was not pure enough. Your private beliefs would be scrutinized, your every action measured against their rigid standards of piety. Your life would be a constant performance of devotion, a fear of being discovered as less than perfectly orthodox in their eyes. Another instance of zealous in-laws comes from the later medieval period, particularly during the fervent wave of witch hunts that swept across Europe. While large-scale witch hunts are more associated with the early modern period, the roots of such paranoia were firmly planted in the medieval world, with the Church increasingly defining and persecuting suspected witches. If you married into a family that was deeply superstitious and convinced of the real and present danger of witchcraft, your life could become a living hell. Perhaps your mother-in-law, convinced by local whispers or even her own paranoid delusions, believed a neighbor was using dark magic. Your in-laws might pressure you to participate in accusations, to engage in bizarre rituals to ward off evil, or to avoid anything they deemed unholy. The Malleus Maleficarum, a notorious treatise on witchcraft, though published at the very end of the medieval period, codified much of the fear and suspicion that already existed. If your in-laws were proponents of such views, your life would be filled with dread, poor harvest, a sick child, a cow that stopped giving milk. Anything could be blamed on witchcraft, and your in-laws might demand you join them in seeking out and prosecuting the alleged witch. Failing to show sufficient zeal could make you a target of suspicion yourself, especially if you were an outsider. Your own health could be jeopardized by their insistence on strange cures or exorcisms. If they believed you were afflicted by demonic influence, the dangers weren't always about outward persecution. Sometimes it was about a suffocating spiritual devotion that left no room for personal joy or individuality. Imagine in-laws who believed all earthly pleasures were sinful, who insisted on constant prayer, fasting, and mortification of the flesh. They might dictate your diet, your clothing, your daily schedule, turning your home into a monastic cell. Your children would be raised under the same oppressive piety. Their education focused solely on scripture and endless religious instruction. Any desire for worldly goods, any enjoyment of music or feasting, any moment of quiet solitude not spent in prayer could be seen as a sign of spiritual weakness, or worse, a dangerous flirtation with sin. Your father-in-law might see it as his sacred duty to correct your behavior, perhaps by denying you food or forcing you into uncomfortable penances. The records of monastic foundations and the lives of saints often show extreme devotion, but when such zeal permeated an entire noble household, it could create an unbearable atmosphere for anyone less fervent. There was no escape. Your entire identity would be subsumed by their interpretation of the divine, and any attempt to assert your own spiritual path could brand you as ungodly in their eyes, possibly jeopardizing your marriage, your status, and your very soul in their view. Number 4. The financially ruinous. Marriage in the medieval world was not just about love. It was a complex economic transaction, a cornerstone of alliances and wealth accumulation. But what if your in-laws were not just bad with money, but actively designed to drain your resources, leaving you and your spouse impoverished, debt-ridden, and stripped of all security? Financially ruinous in-laws would see your union as a bottomless purse, a chance to settle their own crippling debts, expand their dwindling land holdings, or simply live a lavish lifestyle at your expense. They wouldn't care about your future. They'd only care about what they could extract from you in the present, leaving you stranded in a world where financial instability could mean social disgrace, literal starvation, or even imprisonment. Consider the convoluted world of dowries and jointures. A dowry was the wealth a bride brought to her husband's family, often in land, money, or goods. A jointure was the provision made for a wife should her husband die, usually a portion of his lands or income. A financially ruinous father-in-law might demand an exorbitant dowry from your family, far exceeding your means, crippling your own kin and perhaps even forcing them into debt. Then, after the marriage, he might fail to honor the jointure agreement, or even worse, seize control of your dowry lands himself, refusing to let you or your husband benefit from them. The Paston Letters, a collection of correspondence from a gentry family in 15th century England, offer a glimpse into the constant financial anxieties and legal battles over property and marriage settlements. These letters frequently discuss disputes over inheritances, the management of lands, and the desperate attempts to secure favorable financial arrangements. If your in-laws were like some of the more avaricious figures mentioned in these letters, they might repeatedly borrow money from you and your spouse, promising repayment that never comes. They might use your name to secure loans, plunging you into debt without your knowledge, or demand that your property be mortgaged to support their lavish tastes or disastrous investments. Imagine a powerful but increasingly impoverished feudal lord as your father-in-law. Perhaps his family had fallen on hard times due to reckless spending, failed crusades, or a succession of poor harvests. He sees your marriage to his son as his last chance to restore his fortunes. He demands a massive dowry, perhaps a sum so large that your own family has to sell off valuable lands or jewels to meet it. Once the marriage is sealed, he continues to bleed your resources. He might insist on maintaining a huge, expensive retinue of knights and servants, paid for entirely out of your dowry lands. He might demand that your husband, his son, continually fund his ambitious yet doomed political ventures or military campaigns. Should you inherit wealth from your own family, he might claim it as his right, citing feudal customs or vague family agreements, leaving you with nothing. Chronicles of Jean Froissart are full of examples of lords whose fortunes waxed and waned, and the lengths to which they would go to maintain their lifestyle. Some would resort to outright banditry, seizing goods from merchants, or waging private wars simply to pillage. If your in-laws were involved in such activities, your newfound wealth and security would be constantly at risk, your name associated with their disreputable dealings, and you would be constantly under threat of retaliation from their victims. The financially ruinous in-laws could also be incredibly litigious, constantly dragging you into endless legal battles over property, inheritance, or debts. The legal system in the medieval world was slow, expensive, and often corruptible. A father-in-law obsessed with squeezing every last penny from ancient land claims or disputes with neighbors could drain your entire fortune in legal fees alone, even if the cases were ultimately won. And if they lost, the fines and damages would fall upon your family. They might use their children's marriages as a way to secure control over an inheritance, even if it meant disinheriting their own offspring's spouse. Concept of wardship, where a minor heir's lands were managed by an appointed guardian, often the feudal overlord, could be manipulated by grasping in-laws. If your spouse was a minor heir, your father-in-law might contrive to become his guardian, thereby controlling the estate, taking its revenues and leaving you with nothing but empty promises until your husband came of age, by which time the lands might be desolate and debt-ridden. The accounts of the courts, though sparse for ordinary people, suggest a constant struggle for financial survival among the nobility and gentry, and the power of unscrupulous in-laws to manipulate these systems for their own gain was immense. Your marriage, meant to bring security, instead became a direct pipeline for your family's ruin, leaving you and your children vulnerable and without recourse in a harsh and unforgiving world. Number 5. The Overbearing Controller. Marriage in the medieval world often meant moving into your husband's family home, or at least living within their immediate sphere of influence. What if your new in-laws were not just traditional, but utterly controlling, attempting to dictate every aspect of your life, from your daily schedule to your relationships, your child rearing, and even your wardrobe? The overbearing controller in-laws would see you not as an independent individual, but as an extension of their household, a new recruit to be shaped and molded to their exact specifications. They would brook no dissent, allow no personal space, and make every decision for you, often undermining your spouse's authority and reducing you to a mere puppet in their domestic kingdom. Consider the role of the formidable medieval matriarch, the mother-in-law who ruled her household with an iron fist. Historical sources, such as the writings of Christine de Pizan, offer glimpses into the strictures placed upon women, even noble women, within their households. While some mothers-in-law offered guidance and support, the overbearing one would see your arrival as a challenge to her long-held authority. She might dictate your morning routine, from when you woke to what prayers you said and what chores you performed, regardless of your status. She would scrutinize your appearance, criticizing your choice of gown or your hairstyle if it did not conform to her exact standards. Your ability to manage the household servants would be constantly questioned, your methods dismissed as inferior to her own. She might even restrict your access to your own husband, perhaps insisting on separate chambers or controlling your shared time. The accounts of courtly life, though often idealized, suggest a strict hierarchy where the matriarch often held significant sway over the female members of the household. An overbearing mother-in-law might openly criticize your upbringing, your family's customs, or your previous life, making you feel perpetually inadequate and unwelcome in your new home. Control would extend to the most personal aspects of your life, especially your children. Your overbearing in-laws might insist on dictating how your children are raised, what they are taught, and even what names they are given, overriding your wishes and your spouse's. They might claim primary responsibility for the children's religious instruction or their upbringing by nurses and tutors, effectively marginalizing you as a parent. Your every decision regarding your child's health or well-being would be subject to their approval, with their traditional remedies and beliefs overriding any new ideas or practices you might bring from your own family. The letters exchanged between noble families sometimes hint at these domestic power struggles, with young wives often feeling isolated and powerless against the entrenched authority of their husband's parents. The very purpose of marriage was to produce heirs, and your in-laws would be intensely invested in the health and future of your children, often to a suffocating degree. They might even claim the children were more their lineage than yours. Further undermining your maternal role, this controlling behavior wasn't limited to the matriarch. An overbearing father-in-law could be equally stifling, especially if he was a powerful lord or a wealthy merchant. He might dictate your social circle, forbidding you from associating with anyone he deemed unsuitable, perhaps for political or economic reasons. He might control your movements outside the household, limiting your visits to your own family or friends. He might even demand that your husband prioritize his family's interests and demands over your marital happiness, causing deep rifts in your relationship. If your husband was financially dependent on his father, the father-in-law would wield immense power, using financial leverage to enforce his will upon both of you. The documents related to land management and feudal obligations often show how a father maintained significant control over his adult sons, especially their economic lives. He might refuse to grant your husband sufficient lands or income, keeping him subservient and unable to assert his independence, which in turn kept you under the thumb of your overbearing father-in-law. Every decision, from how many servants you employed to what you ate for dinner, would be made or heavily influenced by your in-laws, leaving you with no true agency. Your home, which should have been a sanctuary, would instead feel like a prison, where your every thought and action was scrutinized by the omnipresent, overbearing eyes of your in-laws.